So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Qalandar Shah, and this is our fourth episode of OEC Talks. This OEC Talks is a project that comes under the major umbrella of education for educational change, Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral, in which we are having multiple projects being run. And OEC Talks is basically one of the main projects that is conducting multiple talks in regards to the latest developments and the major burning issues of Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral. So this talk will be moderated by me and one of my colleagues, that is Ms. Kiran. Inshallah, she'll be with us in a short while as well. And I myself am working in OEC as an information secretary, and along with that, I am overviewing this OEC Talks projects with Mr. Fardad, and our whole team that is working tirelessly for these talks to be conducted. Before going towards the formal talk, I just want to set a pretext and a background of the need for this talk, that is climate change and its effects on Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral. It is a very important topic to discuss because not only in the context of Gilgit-Baltistan or Pakistan, rather it is important across the world these days, because climate has been affecting multiple areas in the shape of floods, major torrential rains, and major fires that we have seen in the last decade or so. And especially in the context of Gilgit-Baltistan, we cannot ignore this climate change. From a very recent survey and a study that was conducted by Focused Humanitarian Association, what they made a survey how important that is and how much we have been ignorant regarding this climate change. I want to read the survey text by text. It's not a very long one. There are a couple of paragraphs that actually hit me, and that was one of the reasons that our team thought that we should have a talk regarding this one. What they basically say is that climate change is inducing hazards and increasing in number in northern Pakistan. And the report shows that 125 out of the 600 villages in the northern side of the Pakistan, there are almost 20% in 4 districts of upper Indus basin of Pakistan are highly vulnerable to the multiple natural hazards. And these 4 districts are basically Unza, Nagar, Chitral, and Gilgit itself. The survey further shows that around 48% of the homes in the 4 districts that I've already mentioned today of Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral fall under the multiple hazard zones. And these hazard zones have been affecting lifestyles and the lands of our people in the last decade or so. And based on this research and multiple other research, a paper was presented by the Chief Executive Officer of FCA, Ms. Nusrat Nasab, in a recent international conference that was for the climate change and the environmental change effects. What she said was a very important thing. She mentioned that natural disasters are increasing in number and frequency, and over 131 such events have occurred in a short span of around 28 days back in 2015. From 15 July of August, there were 131 natural disasters that killed more than 37 people in Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral. You can imagine that sometimes we can be ignorant about this, and then only we think about how important this climate change has been for us. And for this special topic, we are lucky to have an esteemed guest with us, that is Ms. Fozia, Dr. Fozia Parveen. First of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Fozia, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Qalandar, and thank you to everyone in your team as well.
Okay. So I'm going to introduce. I would like to introduce Dr. Fozia to all our guests today. And Dr. Fozia is basically a fellow and a faculty at LUMS, that is the that is the university in Lahore, and she has done her MPhil from engineering in engineering science from the University of Oxford with sustainable water treatment groups, which she worked with advanced membrane technology to treat wastewater. And she has done her MS and BS from NUST and Fatima Jinnah Women University, respectively. And other than that, she's an environmental activist as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Fozia Parveen, for that as well, because we have a very thin number of environmental activists around these days, and she is spearheading multiple projects towards the environmental conservation as well. So without further ado, ma'am, we want to dive into our topic today, and we want to start with some questions with you, and what are your thoughts about them? And first of all, I want to talk about a topic that we sometimes take very lightly, despite the fact that environment is affecting us in multiple ways. And already I've shared with you the numbers and figures how much it has been affecting us. Still, environment is ignorant. We are quite ignorant toward it. We, as humans, we can live without a social system, without a political system, but without a proper ecosystem, it is very difficult to survive. We all know that. But still, we haven't been very concerned about in our environment. Do you think, Dr. Fauzia, that this attitude has become even worse, or what do you think can we do toward to make this topic quite important in our society?
Once again, thank you very much for having me. And I don't know, I always have double opinions on matters. And when it comes to awareness about climate change and environment, I don't think our forefathers were ignorant, or even my grandparents in that sense. If I look back at the communities that we have, I remember in our culture, they call, they say even salt cannot be wasted. So salt is so cheap, like, you can just throw it away and it wouldn't cost you anything. But I know that my grandmother used to make sure that, we wouldn't waste salt. Similarly, I think there are a couple of other concepts. For example, the concept of calling snow leopard suchkum. I don't know what is it called in respective languages in GB, but in Wahi we call it suchkum. And by suchkum we mean that this particular species wouldn't come to a place that's inhabited by human beings. But also what that means is this particular species would only stay or be found in pristine and very clean environments. Now, of course, it doesn't tell you the scientific term for it, whether it's keystones, what rule. Our cultures, they were always aware of the fact that this particular species would be found in a certain kind of environment. The tea that we drink, which is trumuro, you wouldn't find it in the lowlands. We know that it has a specific ecosystem, and you'll only be able to go climb and then get trumuro and get it dried and drink it. So I think in a way, we do know, or we were aware, that there are critical ecosystems and there are species that would only reside in those critical ecosystems. Culturally, we come from a culture that is, of course, very minimalistic. Our homes are very, very nature-based, in a sense that we're not making cement and then making it. So naturally, we had those homes which were from nature. We would just bring the stones and then the mud and make homes, which was then also very good for winters as well as summers. All of that was there without any science, without any technology, without any introduction to environmental sciences. So in a way, I would tend to disagree with the fact that people who are not educated, or people in GB in particular, I think they were aware of all of these nuances of species, ecosystems, and even glaciers as well. There are a lot of tales about glaciers that maybe I'll share later, but I think I'll stop there, and then bring it down to, I think, our generation. I think we are ignorant in a sense that we now have access to knowledge. We now know the terms, we read them from the books. Our science textbooks have all the information that we need from our childhood. but we tend to be the ignorant ones. So I would think that, we did not have a lot of awareness. Those who did not have a lot of awareness actually were aware of the importance of species, ecosystems, and living a minimal life. And then there is us, who is definitely doing all the opposite things. We like to show off, we like to compete, we are materialistic, we want to accumulate wealth, we are very selfish, selfish not just with our own species, but species that are from.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point that you have raised here, because it's the other way around, the way you are talking about. And yeah, it's true. Our forefathers were definitely minimalistic. They always wanted to conserve. Well, they might not have the all these fancy words for environment, but they did have the insight towards it, that we have to protect it. But you're right that our generation have somehow, we are lost towards it. That we do know the terms for it, but we don't know how to preserve it. We see all the high-rising buildings and whatnot, and the environment is going towards the waste that we unfortunately see in front of our eyes. Yeah, we'll definitely dive into towards it, and how can we improve it. And now I guess there's another thing as well that I wanted to go towards, and that is that with the passage of time, conflicts due to environment are emerging. We know that most frequently. And on the international arena, there are countries such as Bangladesh, which has already declared environment and climate change as one of the most important threats towards that country. And there are other countries such as Maldives, which is being said that towards 2050 it will be uninhabitable due to the recent developments. What do you think that? And we also see in Europe, in South Asia and Middle East as well. We see all these extremes of temperature. We have seen water crises as well, and such the extreme droughts as well. What do you think Pakistan needs to do to avoid such fate? We unfortunately have seen floodings, but we might go towards an extreme of all these. Do you think that we can somehow avoid these fates of nature? What do you think, Dr. Fauzia?
Thank you again for the question. It has a lot of, it has a very broad answer, but I'll try to contextualize it as well as give some examples of what flood means to different communities, what flood means to a developed world. And I was 2 years ago when I came, I was also talking on the same topic, and I told them when we were at Oxford, they sent an alarm that there is flooding. Flooding for them means the slight increase in the normal water flows in their water body, whereas flooding for us means, unless it drowns your communities, your streets, that's when we call it flood. I think we have to wait for communities to be impacted until we call it flood, whereas they were saying, be careful when you drive around XYZ river because the water level is rising. And I thought maybe rise as in the rise in Hunza, but it was very different. It was a slight rise, but that could have meant for some homes, for example, that are very close to the water body, that the water might have entered their homes. But for everyone else, for the entire city to be so alarmed about the fact that there is flooding, is the first time I was made aware of how important public life is and how important defining terms are when it comes to disasters, when it comes to risks, when it comes to mitigating them in the end, and also making sure that information is given to every individual, no matter how close or far they are from that particular site of incident. Now we have, as we grew up in GB, we had avalanches. We always hear them. There's always sounds coming around depending on where in the community we are. Landslides, we've always seen them. You would be the luckiest person on earth if you haven't ever had to stop by the KKH because of a landslide after even a short spell of rain. So for us, I think it has always been right in front of us, and like you mentioned in the beginning, the gloughs, the occurrences of gloughs, everything else that has been impacting the area in general, it's as we say with data, that it's increasing in numbers in Pakistan. And although I will be saying it for the umpteenth time, but I'd like to repeat it again, that Pakistan is or has always been one of the most vulnerable countries when it comes to the impact of climate change. And currently, I don't think we have the facilities or we have the capacity to, in any case, make sure that we curb the impacts, or we mitigate the impacts, or we adapt to the impacts of climate change. So I don't know what the right answer to this would be, but absolutely the entire globe is being impacted by the impacts of climate change, but we are being impacted at a much higher rate despite having very minimal input. We are at the verge of receiving it. Unfortunately, it mostly manifests in the form of water disasters. The climate change often manifests either as scarcity or and drought or floods. And I think in our case, it's mostly floods or flooding. In very few spaces, maybe droughts. But now that I've said it, I remember that this summer when I was visiting home, they told me that there's a delay. So, we do not know. And you're talking about conflicts. If we say that there are climate change induced conflicts, those conflicts can be very nuanced and very local as well. So, for example, when I was there this summer, there is delay because it's cold. The winters are really cold. In May, we call it for example, in my mother tongue, we call it Varun, which is for the first time, we water our fields soon after the winter's over and it's spring. And because there was a delay in melting and it was still very cold, I could see a lot of people blaming another person. He is so greedy, naming someone and saying he's so greedy, he'll never leave the water for anyone else. So even that conflict, I think that emerges in a small village between individuals, I would still call it a climate-related conflict, that because of that delay in the melting of the glacier when the summer starts, how they then resolve those conflicts between them and make sure that everyone gets to sow the seeds on time. So for that matter, I think I would call even that a small-scale climate change-induced conflict. But you've seen bigger conflicts, and that's very unfortunate for GB, that between villages now, there are conflicts over pasture lands, there are conflicts over, other shared lands, which I think, there's a human side. It's quite unfortunate.
Exactly, it is unfortunate, Dr. Fauzia. As you mentioned that climate change and its disasters are not really limited to the water, the floodings and all that, because obviously whenever there is a flood, it brings a lot of other disasters along with it, such as land erosions and the lands being destroyed where you sow your crops and whatnot. So once climate change is in its full flow and the disasters are there, then you cannot stop the effects of it. It's not just in the form of floodings, obviously. And we do know that you mentioned the point that I don't know if we can mitigate it right now or not, but in the context of GB and Chitral, do you think that there is still a possibility? Obviously, there is the hope, but legislation toward it, a political, maybe on the government level, you might have thought about it, because as you said that you have been working in the environment towards environmental betterment and all, and you are an environmental activist. So do you think that we have some options towards it in context of our own areas?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to climate change, two terms are really important, and people often, and even I at times, confuse it. One is mitigation, where it mostly applies to people and places that have polluted a lot and are trying to mitigate. So for example, if we had a lot of industries, we would try and mitigate the GHG emissions so that we mitigate climate change or stop the emissions. Whereas what we have to do, or what we tend to do, areas like ours, which has very limited growth, very limited development infrastructure, but still are at the receiving end of climate change disasters, we have to have the ability to adapt. which means that even though we did not have a lot of emissions per se, but there would be, because of the impacts, we would be hit hard. So we kind of need to make sure that we adapt to it. So communities are given the ability to stop land erosion, move, have the financial assistance, etc. But I can see there's like a timer coming up there. But what can we do? What can we do about it? So I think in terms of our ability to do something about it in legislations, they come at two levels. One is the village level legislation and communities itself. Everyone everywhere else in Pakistan gives examples of the communities from the north, and I think for the right reason, because we do have the capability to come together and make sure that, for example, if because of excessive siltation, because of excessive melting and siltation, then a channel is closed, the entire community comes together and cleans it and makes sure that water is comes down to the people living downstream. So there are those level of organizations as well, which are commendable and I think should be mentioned again and again. If we look at the government and its policies, I am aware of a climate change adaptation plan that was set by the Environmental Protection Agency of Gilgit-Baltistan. In general, like wherever I go, I'm very fond of the EPA GB. I think they're very limited in their resources and manpower, but they're some very nice people. So they have that legislation. Of course, any other EPA regulation from the top also sort of translates in GB as well. Of course, we have all the other organizations like the Forestry Department, the Disaster Management, and they, all the national plans also apply to them as well. I recently, when we went this summer to meet the Forestry Department head, they were actually talking about how we are cutting down our forests. And if you remember, someone was just before that, someone there was a whole truckload of wood that was being stolen, and then I think the police opened fire on the driver, and the driver fled and was missing, and there was a lot of local noise. Because I'm an environmentalist, I think both me and the forestry head probably were okay with the driver going missing, because he shouldn't have cut all those trees. But he was found 2 or 3 days later. But the locals made a lot of noise of about how the police opened fire on them. I think it's something that I say in my classes, in my sessions very often is we have to agree on the cost. If you do not value a tree as much as you value a human life, that's your choice, because the services that the tree is doing for you is, it cannot be put down in numbers, because it's a lot, because it's serving you, it's cleaning the air for you, it's giving a home to biodiversity. There's so much more that it's doing that we should acknowledge. So I think that way, there are regulations. So for example, any parks, any forests that are restricted, people shouldn't be going there. They're all there. So I think these are some of the regulations that I can think of over the top of my head. But yeah, I think I'll stop there for now and let you ask any other question.
Yeah, the legislation that you talked about on the community levels, on the village levels, and the regional levels, they are there somehow, but we have time and again, failed to oblige to them, which is unfortunate. Yeah, but maybe environmental activists such as you and many others, if we keep on trying to push a sense of this importance of the environment into the minds of everyone around us, maybe these legislations and these rules will be obliged towards, which is very important to us. You're right about it. There is a very important question which is being tossed by one of our listeners right now. I would like to read it. It is more of a suggestion and a question as well that I would like to have your word about it as well. He says that, Mr. Daniel, he says, since the curriculum developed for secular education has time and again failed to include academic content surrounding this area, do you think we need to include of such topics in our religious curriculum, or maybe in the secular school curriculums as well, regarding the environmental activism, and even small acts like educating students to use cotton bags and opting for tub rather than taking showers and etc. Would you think that would work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a very, very important question, and of course, it comes down to people like me and Daniel, who are, and you, who have the capability to change at least one mind, or creating that change in the communities that we are a part of. First and foremost, of course, we need to create curriculum, and I don't know how much people like me are successful, because we do try to integrate as many contextual local case studies in our academic teaching as we can. Then in the community, so the activism side of it, for example, I have made curriculums for some youth weekend camps that we run. So there is a whole curriculum that I've developed, which I've already given to the trainers, who will now be training a lot of other youth who will be conducting these camps for our community. But then I'm also thinking, and I also already have created this content as well. So the same content is being updated, and I'll, as a part of, for example, a Smiley Civic, be teaching that content to school level teachers, and that's not paid bound. So everyone's welcome to come and join that, but it will exclusively be for school teachers. So why I'm saying this is, my capabilities are limited, but I'm doing what I can, for example, in the limited space that I have, or limited access that I have. Similarly, you have a reach, right? So you have started this program, and I hope that you will do it as well, and like you, so many other people will do it too. But I would definitely think and emphasize on one thing, which is a lot of us just keep giving sweeping statements, including myself, because my research area is very niche and I'm currently working there. So I do not have a lot of GB specific work that I've done there, or studies that I've done there. So I think for your generation, and even for me, a reminder that we need to research more, study it more, have more peer-reviewed publications that can be used by people in future as well. And then be made sure that whatever curriculum or text or scholarship is coming from GB is can be used for future, because as you know, climate change, and I do say it again and again as well, it's not data of 1 year, 2 year, or 1 decade or 2 decade. We have to have like decade-long continuous data from weather stations, from local resources, to be then able to predict and save our communities in future. So unless all of us do it together and start working on it, I don't think we'll be in a place where we'll give very credible forecasting for the future of GB, for the future of Pakistan and the world. But most importantly, because we lie at a very critical ecosystem, definitely for us first, and then for rest of Pakistan, because we do provide 75% of the water resources that's going to rest of Pakistan. So yeah, I would say there's a lot of room for good scholarship, good research, not just in the cryosphere, but in how it's impacting people and how it's impacting livelihoods, and definitely a lot of case studies, and not sweeping statements as we all give all the time.
Exactly, exactly. You know that we have been, this has been a habit of ours, all of us, including me as well, I guess, that we are more of, we talk about it and the next day nothing is being done. So there is a very important thing that you said that I would like to, have it as a takeaway statement, that we should be doing more. I mean, yeah, doing what we can do. I mean, individually, on a very individual level, that as Daniel said, a couple of things such as using a cotton bag instead of a plastic bag, going to a shop. You can say that you can take a cotton bag along with you. Let's stop damaging our environment as much as that we are doing right now. So I guess it starts with at a very individual level, that we have to improve ourselves, and obviously we have to include these to our curriculums as well. We have to do lots of research, lots of case studies that will help us in the future. So I was talking about this question, that how these crises such as climate change and all these food security, water security, these are non-traditional threats to us. And do you think that obviously countries need to behave in a better manner to counter these issues? Because once there is a problem, climate change related problem in China or in India, it's not really just limited to these countries. It obviously affects the neighboring countries, such as if there is a flooding problem in Pakistan, it's going to affect the neighboring countries as well. So we being in a very, very important geographical area right now, Pakistan, is there? It is a question in a broader aspect. What are the things that we need to go towards and maybe cooperate with our neighboring countries? Are there any steps that you have thought about as an activist that we can do to bring everyone onto one table? I mean, it is a question of quite broader aspect, but still I want to ask because it's a very important question, Dr. Fozia. Do you think that we can take some steps to bring these countries, these larger corporations onto one table and talk about these things?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the way forward, and as you see, COP26 is going to be happening after the Kyoto this in a few days. It has already started actually in Glasgow. And we call it a remarkable event because for the first time, governments from all across the world came together and said, we have to do something. It's already too late. And now they're meeting for the 26th time to see all the commitments that they made. Is it going anywhere? Are they achieving anything? In the case of GB and Pakistan, I think I'll go from GB up to Pakistan level. Firstly, there needs to, of course, be more coordination between villages. And I'm glad that you've mentioned food security because between the questions, I forgot one of the most important things, which is the livelihood of people, many people in Pakistan, not just people in the mountain communities, which is agriculture. Agriculture is being impacted by climate change. So the rise in temperature might support growth of one particular crop, but it would definitely impact the growth of the other. Similarly, for example, the rain, the precipitation that's happening, the changes in the rain in our area, how that is impacting the quality of, for example, dried fruits that were otherwise just lying there, and people wouldn't expect rain at a certain time in the year. And then now when I went there, they were saying that now our dried apricots just go a little darker because they're exposed to rain, otherwise wouldn't have rain in this season. Just these simple things that are now leading for the livelihood of the people to be compromised in a sense that their crop yield productivity isn't promised. They're not sure what it's going to be what it's going to be like in future. And then similarly, whatever produce they have, would it be enough for them to have more financial security, I think. And for me, as long as I can see around, more conflicts arise when people are financially insecure, and more also conflicts arise when people do not see a promising future for their children. So I think for us then, the idea is, now there is a market outside of GB, outside of Chitral, where they want food from the GB in these parts of the world, because here they're using seeds, genetically modified seeds. They're using a lot of fertilizers. They're using a lot of pesticides. They're using, for example, wastewater, which is often mixed with industrial wastewater for food production. So people are preferring food that is coming from a more cleaner environment. So if we have, for example, but our produce is low, we're small farmers, we're divided. So if there were a mechanism for us to come together, for villages to come together and promise one corporation here or one superstore here that will give you XYZ amount of potatoes or dried apricots, which would be enough to meet your consumer demand, and then bring it to shelf directly from the farmer. So I think definitely one way is not only making us food secure by equipping us with modern tools, modern technology, definitely less industrial agriculture and more sustainable agriculture, so that we get to have healthy food, but also taking the rest, whatever is left, to the market to make sure that we are economically sustainable. The same can be said by farmers all across Pakistan. And then as far as cooperating between regions is concerned, that's exactly what's happening across the globe. And I think recently we were having this conversation about why are we, how are we exporting? So on the one hand, our cities are now facing water scarcity. But then when it comes to exporting our products, we are selling it really, really cheap to some of the neighboring countries like Sri Lanka, all the other neighboring countries, and not really to a more competitive market, which is outside, let's say Europe. So bringing that financial security by bringing more prosperity and more tools and more cooperatives of sorts, if that makes sense. Around in the region. We definitely need to learn a lot from India, definitely need to learn a lot from Bangladesh. China, I'm not too sure, because China has its own way of doing things, but I think they're now, because of the global commitments that they've made, they're now trying to also be environment friendly, but very often they have compromised. That's the same can be said by India, but I think their research is really, really progressive. And I think 2 years ago when I came, India had its first organic state, which is Sikkim. And it's exceptional that communities are now understanding the threats that a lot of non-environment friendly practices have brought, and are now going back to nature and making sure that whatever they do, it's good for them, it's good for their health, but it's also good for the health of the environment. So that way, I think we can take some learnings there in terms of research. For example, India is doing really, really well because they invest a lot of money into research. And in terms of economic development, definitely Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is, you can see that they're very export driven, and a lot of their products make it to global market. So I would say, even though climate change is a scientific problem, but I think its solution lies in people, and people will only be willing to come and do something about it if they have like food 3 times on their plate. Until you make them sufficient, self-sufficient, have good food, have enough money to educate their children, and whatever bare minimum needs they have, those have to be met. Only then will we make the communities think, ponder about what can they do to save the climate. So unfortunately, we'll have to take the start from there, and in that process, maybe educate our younger communities to ensure that they know what our forefathers did, what was the indigenous practices and technologies that we shouldn't let go. And as we say, for example, agriculture is also culture, and that has to do with land. So like not letting the culture that we have go, and making sure that our future generations are sort of connected to the roots as well. So yeah, I mean, definitely there is an unconventional threat which people do not know. There is no particular forecasting for it. Like I said, we do not have enough data to even properly predict what kind of weather events or patterns we'll have in future. So that makes it even more difficult. And we'll continue to rely on researchers from abroad. So you have people coming from Utrecht and other countries now researching on most of our cryosphere. But we do not have a lot of local indigenous scholarship that should be doing most of the job. We are finally going there. We are finally getting there, and a lot of weather stations, etc., are being put at multiple places, but we're still far from where we should be. So yeah, I mean, both scientific and economic empowerment will then enable, without compromising on the quality of the environment, like all of them have to be taken into account.
Yes, ma'am, definitely can't agree much with your words. Thank you so much. And I am going to proceed with the session. My name is Kiran. I am currently pursuing my Bachelor's of Studies in English, and I am part of OEC talks. So I'll be asking you some of the more questions. So proceeding with the session, my first question is, can you share some of the very concerning predictable impacts of climate change on our lives in the next 10 years, like the lives of mountain communities, and specific to Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral, and in general to Pakistan? What as a nation we must do in order to counter these things, and what policies should be made so that we can slow down the increasing effect of this climate change?
Yeah, so like I've highlighted some of these before, but I'll try to make it organize it in a more structured way again. Firstly, definitely water availability, and too much water or too little water. So, for example, I was telling Qalandar how we have delayed glacial melting, which then delays our agriculture, which is something that we're not used to, because right after Nowruz, we give it some time and then we start preparing our land for agriculture. So that way, there's a compromise, for example, on the traditional methods and the traditional timelines that we used to follow. Then, of course, is water availability, because now the land is dividing more into, as families divide, the land divides, and then whatever stream that you have to make sure that there's equitable and just distribution of water. And then suddenly there's too much water. So when it's winter and there's less water available, that's a problem. But then when it's summer and there's extra melting of glacier, and then also there are more monsoon rains now in GB, unlike the ones that we used to have when we were young. So suddenly there's too much water, and then that impacts our connectivity, which I think is really important in the case of GB. Our connectivity to rest of the world, whether that's China or mainland Pakistan, it hampers that and then automatically disconnects us and our prosperity as well. So definitely those two would be the highlights. And then the biodiversity. I don't think we have profiled a lot of plant species that we have. We haven't really. It's only recently that we've started looking at some of the species that we have. The rate at which temperature is changing, and if you look at literature and scholarship, it will tell you that the summers are becoming a little more warm, and then winters, there's a slight decrease in the lower temperature in winters as well. Now, we as human beings have the capability to maybe put more firewood, maybe install a fan and get away with it. Some of the species, some of the keystone species, they cannot even bear a slight change in the environment in terms of chemicals, in terms of temperature. And so automatically, a lot of those plant and animal species will be compromised on. So I think those, and then there are a few more that I would like to highlight, which are not directly related to climate change, but I think would impact our environment a lot. One is mining, which we are doing at an unprecedented rate. Of course, I've already mentioned deforestation, so I'll leave it there. I don't think our afforestation is as quick and fast as our deforestation, and people are like, there's a timber mafia that's still operating in our forests, that's cutting down the trees. So that's definitely an issue, and that is then going to impact the carbon balance and everything else. Definitely with CPAC and the rise in tourism, for example, I don't see the need for a road go from KKH to Wilmette Glacier, which is under the Rakaposhi, right? Because I think we have to make sure that there's a fine balance as to how far are we going to go, unless it's for the community and their access to a certain pasture. These sites shouldn't be open for all tourists. Reason being, again, our ecosystems are really critical. So if a lot of people go there, if a lot of jeeps go there, if a lot of noise is there, you've seen people wash their cars on very fresh streams in GB during the tourist season. I haven't talked a lot about Chitral, but for example, in Chitral, I was presenting once on Chitral and the polo ground that they have there, and I was looking at the impact on the water bodies along when the festival is happening, how they're over extracting the fishes, sometimes through very unethical means. So they release gas in the water and then kill the fishes and then sell it, and it's over exploiting a resource without really thinking what the impact would be. So it's partly climate and nature sort of hitting us back, but it's also us allowing a lot of these events to happen. So I would say those are a compromise on our critical ecosystems. Definitely with climate change, the land erosion. I've seen it with my own eyes for Passu, how very often there's excessive glough. You would have seen the frequency of glacial lake outburst flood, which has also become very, very frequent because of climate change and increases in temperature. And then added on to that is the phenomenon of land erosion. And this also happens when there's excessive rain in the summer months. We are in those tiny valleys are losing a lot of land when there's excess water. So I think there are a lot of issues that we are facing. So maybe I'll stop there and I'll let you ask the follow-up question, because I think I missed part of it.
Yep. Due to some reasons, Kiran was unable to stay with us in the meeting, and she has actually left. So I'm just jumping in at the last hour. And Fozia, the next question that we have for you was that you did mention that some pastures and some places in GBC, they shouldn't be open for tourist activities and they shouldn't be allowed to go there. It's just an extension of that question, and this was related to the CPAC. And what I wanted to ask is that with the CPAC route fully functioning through Gilgit-Baltistan, the carbon emission levels in this somewhat previously pristine area, uh, in this environment, it's going to increase multiple folds. What direct and indirect implications can it have on our mountain communities? And do you think the state's investment in scientific research to find the possible implications and the solution to this problem is the need of the hour?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, we are looking, just with the amount of activity that has happened at, for example, in Chitral, because of the human activity and intervention that has gone there. Of course, we have a local conflict there as well. I'll not go to that because that's between pasture communities and that's personal. It has nothing to do with climate. But I think a lot of public intervention, a lot of people going in there and causing excessive tourism, the tourism that mostly has to do with vehicles and the vehicular emission, because as you know, a lot of our fuel isn't clean, a lot of our cars do not have the filters, so automatically that is going to impact. And I think in the case of the polo ground in Chitral, we could see that a lot of plant species were being lost. As far as CPAC is concerned, I have multiple opinions. So the reason why I do not fully go against it is because, I sit with my father's generation who are happy with the economic boom and the opportunities that CPAC is going to bring. And I understand it because they have come from, they've come really, really far from, not having a school in their village and going to Hunza to study ABC when they were in 6th grade to now sending their children to Oxford. They've come really, really far. And for them, every opportunity, every economic opportunity they welcome it. A lot of things that we would say no to, that I would say no to as an environmentalist, they're waiting for it. And they're looking at it as opportunity for, good jobs, good quality hospitals, a lot of other things that are missing. You know how many lives we lose along the KKH, and it's so unfortunate. Like every year after year, we'll have accidents, we'll lose life. There's a lot of landsliding that has caused deaths, and there's no infrastructure close to those accidents that would save those lives. So technically, if CPAC comes in and there's a lot of vehicles going around, automatically it will come with its needed infrastructure, which has to do with health, it has to do with economy, with product, maybe cold storages, a way for Hunza or GB as a whole to be connected to rest of the Pakistani market in Pakistan as well as in China, or maybe rest of the world as well. Just if we become a part of the One Road, One Belt initiative. So there's definitely opportunities there. But I think I was reading somewhere in one of the articles that roughly 60,000 trucks would go in 1 to 2 days, and I couldn't imagine. I just think of how that would look on a community that's so tiny and is not used to so many vehicles. So that's literally one truck passing by every second, probably, or more than that. So I think that will have a lot of impact. That heavy machinery. Because I do not live too far from the KKH, and when we have a heavy truck passing by, our homes do shudder a little bit. And then there are a few homes that are really close to the KKH as well. So I can, other than the exhaust and the emissions, the GHG emissions, and any soot that is related to it and how that would impact the quality, just the mere fact that there are going to be so many vehicles on the road, and I don't think anyone sat down and looked at what impact it's going to cause, and if we have enough green cover to actually filter the air. So maybe that's when we'll see issues similar to what rest of Pakistan is seeing, because up until now we have very limited pollution. and so the air is really clean. But if we bring in, for example, now, GB's water is being contaminated because we do not have wastewater treatment mechanisms. Our septic tanks are filling. Some communities wanted to build a municipal wastewater treatment plant, weren't successful, and now they're sending it to the rivers. A lot of people are putting their trash to the river, and it has started contaminating our water body. If the same happens to our air, like I said, our ecosystem is so critical that I don't think it will be able to handle it. And what scale impacts would happen, I do not know for sure, because none of us have sat down and studied what the emissions are going to be and how that they would impact the nearby glaciers or the nearby species of plants, animals, as well as human health, I think.
Yep, quite understandable. When the 16-wheelers, they start rolling through GBC, I mean, definitely the smoke and the soot, it is going to impact the air quality and etc. in that region. So it was very well versed, and we do need to work on it. And what I've got from your response to this question was that our government indeed has to do something about it, like conduct some research and then take steps according to that. We actually have come to the last question of our session, and this was actually a general one. And as I've understood from listening to your session, that your expertise, they lie in kind of the global environmental scenario. So we have the concept of the northern states and the southern states in social sciences. For example, the developed states like the Europe, America, and everything, actually, they are still the countries that produce bulk of the pollution. But right now we see that these Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, and then we see the new session that's going to be, it's going to convene in Glasgow. So what they're doing is actually they are trying to counter the developing states like Pakistan, India, China. They're suggesting that we should minimize our emissions and stuff like that. But that is, I would say it's a bit unfair for those countries because we need to develop as well. And pollution is a byproduct of development, although it's very bad, but actually, if you look at it in realist terms, it is very important for a country's development. So would you say that this is fair for them to, they damage the environment as much as they could when they were doing it? And now when the southern states are trying to be developed and they are developing their industries, they're putting sanctions on them and saying that you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And first of all, is that fair for the southern states? That was the first part. And the second part is, what could we do, the northern and southern states in collaboration, that could minimize the impact of climate change on the global arena? Because as Qalandar also mentioned, climate change and environmental issues, these are transnational. They don't affect just one country. So in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very, this is a very important question because I'm also often very conflicted. So even recently we were discussing it in our class, and I was telling them the mechanisms that exist under Kyoto for developed world to invest in developing world. So on the one hand, of course, if you look at it under Kyoto, these countries, these developed countries, have a history, over 100 years history of industrialization and growth to a level where they can now breathe and just do what they can do, and we do not. But if you look at it with the Kyoto and the carbon credits and clean development mechanism, they have given a lot of funds to there is a funding that is allocated for technology and reductions to be reduced in the developing world. So they, in a way, they are giving us an opportunity to grow, but to grow in a way because there is funding available, and that funding can be received by developing countries. So the developed countries sort of, there's a whole mechanism to it, but that's how they do it. So I personally think that, they did it without any control. The fact that we have a control, they learned the hard way. Their population suffered. They lost a lot, and now they've come down to, they've invested a lot in making their streets clean again, green again. So any developed world that you go to, the cities are beautiful because there's always a park nearby. And just look at the cities that we live in. It's a jungle. All you see is concrete and vehicles and pollution. That's it. Whereas living in any city abroad it's fun. It's, there are green and happy places that you can be a part of. But if you look, if you think about it, the countries that are growing, for example, Bangladesh has a lot of industries, and a lot of products like Zara do get their products from their clothes, the fabric from Bangladesh. From what I know, their environmental quality is really degrading because they're compromising on, for example, the labor, the money that they get, because the entire focus is on economic growth, not too different from the developed world before they came into this situation that they've come now. That's the cost that you pay. So I think it's upon us to decide as developing world, do we want to have a better economy at the cost of environmental degradation, or do we want to have a better economy that is inclusive of a sustainable environment and does not compromise on the quality that is needed? I think the second or the later would be the approach that our countries should take, which we're not able to take because we're not resourceful, which is like we grow, we continue to grow, we develop ourselves, but without compromising on environment, without damaging our environment. And my area of expertise actually is wastewater treatment. And I very often tell people that a country that only treats 2% of its wastewater and is dumping 98% of its wastewater into clean drinking water or its soil, shouldn't be talking, we shouldn't be doing big talks about you industrialized and you grew, but you're not allowing us to grow. We're killing our own population and our future generations indirectly. We're just waiting for them to by polluting all of our natural capital, and that compromise I think we've made, not the developed world. It has told us that this is not good. We went through this process and we're now giving you the opportunity to think. We have all of this, but we're not learning anything. And yeah, I mean, you can look at it both ways. There is some compromise on it, but countries that are not complying to it are not complying to it. And within Kyoto, there's a whole fund and funding mechanism. The only criticism that I would make, and I think I sort of made it already, is that the funds are very often to mitigate. And places like ours, like Chitral and GB, we need funds to adapt, to build resilient buildings, to build better roads, to build more scholarship, to build more, maybe more factories that are close to home, to connect our farmers and people to markets, to make sure that it's profitable for them. So those are the kind of things that we should be doing that we are not doing. And yeah, I mean, I'll just leave it there. Between global north and global south, of course, I mean, that's an area that's very close to my heart as well. Partly because whichever platform we go to, it's very often dominated by white men from the global north who have, very flowery, rosy picture of everything around. And as a woman from the global south, then, the kind of environments that we live in, because we have to not only face white men from the global north, but also brown men from the global south. So, it becomes even more difficult. So that environmental intersectionality in itself, I think, that's a big debate of how we are impacted more, but then within us, a certain gender would be impacted more, and a certain community would be impacted more, and a certain class would be impacted more. So those discussions, I'm glad, have evolved. But I try to be an optimist, and my optimism is sort of allowing me to think that the fact that, for example, even in Pakistan, a lot of ministries don't sit with each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't have time for each other. So the fact that, these global leadership have committed to something, are coming together and want to bring a change is positive. The only negative that there is that, in the G7, or for example, US opted out, Trump didn't believe in it, opted out, Biden believes in it, came back. So it's there, but it's not fully there, neither for us nor for them. So even though Biden came back and doubled the amount of money that they had promised for the fund, and is sort of making up for the absence of the US, but just the mere fact that it's not an obligation already makes it really, really weak. But that said, like I said, I find it truly fascinating that so many different people and so many leaders of the world can come together and commit to a common cause just because they know that we've done enough damage. And if you're following the IPCC report that came just before the COP, it said that we have reached a tipping point. We have caused a lot of irreversible damage. We are past a lot of damages. So whatever we can do at this point, I think still welcome. And before I finish, I would also want to add, because I missed that part, what Pakistan and Pakistani leadership in general can do for GB. I don't think the focus on the one hand, like you would see GB being projected as the face of Pakistan. Almost always you would, every video, every notes, every presentation would start with Gilgit-Baltistan and the people of Gilgit-Baltistan. But when it comes to action, I think we are never a priority for the government. So for me, if the government could make us a priority, whether that's for scholarship, for universities, for research, for healthcare, like I said, we lose lives, we are impacted. A lot of our people still are living below the poverty line, despite being such peaceful and living as a community. We still face a lot of difficulties. So there's definitely a need for a lot of infrastructure capacities to be translated to Gilgit-Baltistan, so that we are capable of rising, but we need more resources, I think, and more capacity. So that a lot of our own people can go back and serve GB. So for example, all of us are living outside of GB because we do not have any opportunities there. If we had opportunities there, we would be serving our own people. So just bringing those opportunities to GB would mean so much for our communities, because then we would be able to go back and do something. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And the biggest takeaways from this point was that the Kyoto, as you mentioned, they do have specific funds for the developing countries. And along with that, I believe they're working on sharing of technology as well, green technology and all. That is a good step, and it would be very beneficial coming ahead. And along with that, the sustainable usage of our environment, for example, we could use it along with preserving it, and do both of them at the same time. And that's definitely going to help in the sustainable use and taking benefit from the environment. So that would actually conclude our session for the day. We're really thankful, Fozia, for giving us your precious time for this very important topic. And I really hope our participants did take some knowledge from this, and they would be using that in their careers ahead, or like in whatever they're doing. I mean, this is going to be very beneficial for them. And I would also like to mention before we go that effect of climate change, it's also the main theme of our next Educure magazine. OEC also has these annual magazines, and the previous one, it was about mental health. And we did also create a talk on this. We had a specialist on that. And this year, the theme is going to be, for the sixth magazine, it's going to be effect of climate change environment on the world. So keep your eyes out for that. Once it comes out, just give it a read. And thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for joining us as well. We will conclude this session. This video would be recorded. I mean, we are recording it. We would create a combined, I mean, we're going to combine both of the sessions. We upload it to our social media platform, so you can watch it again from there, and just jot down your comments, or you can just share it with your friends as well. Thank you so much, and have a great evening all. Right. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.